Welcome to Sachs Realty's Tuesday Night Podcast, where we talk about anything and everything real estate. Each week, we deliver expert information enabling you to make better informed decisions while keeping more money in your pocket. If you're interested in real estate, this is your show. Welcome to our Tuesday Night Live. I have my good buddy Jack from Nobody Special Finance here with us tonight. It's kind of a real special treat.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Hey, I mean, you're not that far away.
Right down the street.
Couple hour drive.
Yeah.
So we had an opportunity to record a video that we'll publish on Saturday, which I think everyone will love to see. And we got some dinner. We had an opportunity to sit down together and eat some dinner. So guys, welcome. Tonight we're going to go over a lot of different topics. But the biggest topic that we all, we kind of know. By the way, we have a poll out there right now. And if you haven't seen it, you haven't voted. Jack and I were just talking about, and I don't want to skew this poll at all. We're not tracking the information. If you, vote on the poll, it's not like, I know how much money you have. But interestingly enough, here we have 98 votes. A lot of articles are coming out now. We're going to talk about the San Francisco Fed just published a blog that basically, and Joe, pull that back up for a second, published a blog that said that Americans are out of money, essentially, that the stimulus money is finally wore off. And we've kind of talked about it a little bit in past podcasts about the stimulus. And I get a lot of comments that, people don't understand where I'm coming from when I'm talking about stimulus. But here's a poll that we have that, if you don't mind, cruise on over and vote. We'll pull it up again. But how much money do you have in the bank? Less than 1,000, 1,000 to 5,000, 5,000 to 10,000, or more than 10,000. Jack and I said that probably a lot of our audience will have a decent amount of money in the bank because you guys you're listening, you're learning and you're listening, and you know things are around the corner. We may be looking at some real tough times where we need that cash, we need that extra money. And a lot of people say you don't want your money in the bank because inflationary times, but there is a time to have money, cash on hand, at least have some cash. So if you can answer that poll, we'll check back in with it. But anyway, Jack, man, what a pleasure. So we have Jack's. If you've never heard of Nobody Special Finance on YouTube, please cruise on over to his channel. We have a link in the show notes for Jack. Excellent live show every single day, man. I honor, the fact that you're committed to do that every single day. I know what a sacrifice it is just doing it every Tuesday night for almost 4 years. But cruise on over, subscribe to his channel, show him some support with that. But Jack, there's a lot going on.
Yeah, we're talking about the consumer today, and we've all lived with the inflation of the last 3-4 years or so. And, we've all seen the cost of living outpace adjustments in wages. And yet we haven't had that recession that a lot of people, self-included, have been predicting. Somehow the consumer has managed to string along this far. And I think stimulus had a lot to do with it. The accumulation of new debt has had a lot to do with it. But I think we're just now starting to see a lot of the signs that the consumer really is tapped out. And those are starting to filter through to some of the stock results, to some of these obscure data points and surveys, the Fed blog that you referenced. So that cost of living increase is finally catching up with the bottom lines of Fortune 500 companies. And we're going to find out pretty soon what that means. And it's probably not very good for the overall economy.
If you look back in the history of the U.S. economy over the last several hundred years, recession is always somewhere, every so many years, right? I think since have been manipulating the interest rate, we extend that. and now with printing a lot of stimulus, things like that. And as I started off saying, a lot of our viewers, when we mention about stimulus spending, they say, well, I haven't seen it. I don't know what you're talking about. And so tonight we're going to go over some of those programs, and just not to criticize the programs, but just to understand why our economy has run so strong, and why now the lag effect is finally about to show up. And I mean, it's real.
I think a lot of those folks, especially the younger folks who have made that very statement that, oh, I haven't seen any stimulus, they're seeing the stimulus, receiving the stimulus, and probably don't even realize it. Not to jump too far ahead, but student loan forgiveness, student loan deferments, that is a massive stimulus. People who would be paying a few $100s a month for student loan payments that supposedly resumed about a year ago now, or a year and a half ago. Most people are still not making their payments. Was it a year ago? Maybe it was October.
Yeah, it was. I think it was November 1. They had to start making their payments.
But a lot of people still aren't making those payments.
Well, they said that it won't show up on the credit report. So, I think they have another 12 months from when they had to start making their payments to where it won't affect their credit if they aren't making their payments. I'm pretty sure that that's where we are.
Now, that's not to say that person's not feeling hardship from the cost of living increases. But the fact is, without that stimulus of not having to make those student loan payments, you would be spending several $100s a month less on your rent, on your food, on discretionary expenses, entertainment, and things like that. So maybe you haven't had a check in your mailbox every month, but if you have been the beneficiary of those deferred student payments or those forgiven student loans, you've received stimulus, and you're spending more in the economy whether you realize it or not. So there's a lot of stealth stimulus that's been going on, especially since the actual stimmy checks have stopped flowing, that a lot of people don't quite realize that's out there.
Yeah. Well, let's look at this Fed post here. So the San Francisco Fed posted the blog May 3rd. And after I've read the article, I really came to the conclusion that, as we've all sort of suspected, consumers are broke. Maybe not all consumers, but actually they're worse than broke because they're in debt. So I think that's you can be broke and not owe any bills, right? That's kind of like a good feeling. Not that being broke's a good feeling, but it's kind of a good feeling if you can pay all your bills and you wash them out and you don't have any money left in your pocket or only a couple dollars, but you really don't have any debt. I think now what people are realizing is now not only do they not have the money in their account finally, is that they're in debt. So anyway, let's take a look at this. The latest estimate of overall pandemic excess savings remaining in the U.S. economy has turned negative. You can look at the chart here, suggesting that American households fully spent their pandemic era savings as of March 2024. Guys, this is not me saying that, right? It says that, however, consumer spending has remained strong in recent months, which raises an important question: what's next? Now, this is a blog post from San Francisco Fed, but let's take a look at this chart here. Now, as you see, I mean, this is kind of, see if I can make my chart a little bit bigger here on my, maybe not. I don't know. It just disappeared altogether. But let's see. What happened? There we go. Joe, what would I do without you? All right, so here you go. You can see basically where it started in 21, and then basically where we are in 2024. This is the cumulative pandemic era excess savings. So people say, I didn't receive that much money, if I received it at all. It's finally good, Jack, to see that the Fed's admitting that consumers have been propped up. They said here that the excessive savings calculated as the accumulative difference in actual de-annualized personal savings and the trend implied by data for the 48 months leading up to the first month of the 2020 recession. It says that they've been propped up. You know, that the Fed has admitted that consumers have been propped up, and this is why prices have been allowed to skyrocket.
And, you know, the key takeaway, and, you know, this was before I started my channel, but I remember having discussions on Twitter, now called X, when these stimmy programs were being passed in 2020, and I was just pounding on the table, this isn't right, this isn't helping, we're not being given anything, we're being robbed. They were passing these massive rescue plans and stimulus bills. They were several $1 trillion, and yet, you know, they were promising $300 checks, and if you added up the $300 checks they were sending everybody times the number of people, it was only a few $100 billion, and yet the packages they were passing were several trillion. So they were printing all of this money. The Fed was monetizing all this debt. They were giving us a couple of pennies, but they were actually helping themselves. Most of this money was going into, you know, political favors, infrastructure projects that, you know, had a lot of corrupt politicians going in. And you'll notice now the stimmies are gone. We've seen in this chart, but we still are living with the higher prices.
Well, the stimulus money was actually about, I think, $5,600 total if you had a family of four. We'll get into that and show, you know, there was a couple different programs and where they kept adding to it. And then Biden, you know, this was under Trump, and then Biden, you know, came up with the American Rescue Plan, the Act, American Rescue Act, and that entailed they sent out more money, and then there was tax credits and things like that. But I think, you know, when we look back at something like this, and one of what we can kind of dive right into is that when you print money, we did more money printing in 2 years than we did in 200 years. I mean, that's a fair statement to say, right? I mean, it's a fact. Have we ever printed that much money?
No. Unbelievable stimulus. And, you know, the key thing with money printing, and most people say, oh, the government could never run out of money. They own a money printer. Well, you have to separate money from wealth, or money from value. Right? When you print money, you don't create any value. You just steal value from the money that already exists. All right? And so if you're anybody who had any savings, any US dollars, when that money was printed during COVID, that value was stolen from you. And they gave you a couple of pennies in your mailbox and then gave themselves most of the rest, and they said, you're welcome. And remember this, because we got an election coming up, and politicians, this will happen again. They will promise people stimmies. They'll say, we're going to pass this big bill and give you relief. They're not giving you anything when they give you a stimulus check. They're stealing $1 from you. They're giving you back 35 cents, and they're telling you you're welcome. And when that stimmy is spent and it's gone, you're going to be left with the higher prices and the higher cost of living. And we didn't just rob ourselves and our own citizens, because most US dollars in existence are outside the United States. We're the world reserve currency. So when we printed that money, not only did we rob our own citizens, but we robbed all of our trading partners, everybody in the world who's holding dollars. And we wonder why everybody hates us. And then the ensuing inflation that was so much worse in every other country around the world, because they started to debase their own currencies, printing that because they needed more of that to buy the dollars they needed to buy oil and to buy food. And it kicked off, you know, not quite hyperinflation, but extremely high inflation all over the world. We really hurt everybody with that money printing.
I think everybody was printing money, just like you said, right? Everyone was printing it the same. I mean, if you think about it, and I want to get it, we're going to dive right into the programs that we've seen, but if you print the money and you put money into the economy, we went from the highest savings that consumers have had, probably historically. We're going to look at that chart, from the lowest amount of money that they have. So I guess the question that really comes out is, what benefit was it printing all of that money? It didn't help to your point, it didn't help the consumers are more in debt today than they've ever been. So we went through the period where we printed this money, we put it in the hands of the consumers with pent up demand to go out and spend money, and everything skyrocketed. I mean, it is kind of like.
Well, inflation hits in a very predictable sequence. The first thing it hits is asset prices, then it hits consumer prices, and lastly, it hits wages. So when you said, who did we help? The first thing it hits is the asset prices. And who owns most of the assets? The wealthy, right? So stocks, near all-time highs. Gold, near all-time highs. Bitcoin, near all-time highs. Real estate, near all-time highs. Commercial notwithstanding. Asset prices all went up in value. The wealthy got wealthier. Now, the people who don't own any assets, the poor, the people who thought they were being given something when they got their stimulus checks, are now left with the higher consumer prices. Stimmy's gone. And then the very last thing that happens is those wages finally start to play catch up. And what happens time and time again, the second those wages start to play catch up, now the Fed is interested in fighting inflation. Now we got to raise interest rates and increase unemployment to stop those wages from going up, to make sure that the poor, who have now been victimized by this, never get a chance to catch up. So who do they help? Themselves at our expense. That's who they help.
Well, let's dive into some of this pandemic-related financial support to households that we're talking about. So this website is usaspending.gov. So we're pulling this is documented here. So really there was about total outlays, and there's a lot of conflicting data depending on which site you go on. This one has a tendency to be a little bit more conservative than some of the other sites that you can go on, but we're going to get a good idea here. And again, we're just trying to figure out where we're headed, guys, because the hangover's about to happen. The hangover's about to hit us. We're seeing the economy slow down. The real estate prices we'll talk about tonight is all across the board. Here locally in Maryland, we're not seeing any hit to real estate right now, but there's Sunbelt areas. I mean, Houston, Austin, we're seeing price declines like crazy. Even in Atlanta, Tennessee, we're seeing price declines. Prices are in most of the country. A lot of the prices are coming down. The Northeast is very sticky. Here in Maryland, we have a ton of wealth, and very little inventory. We're not seeing the inventory skyrocket like a lot of other parts of the country. So we'll get into the real estate a little bit later on in the show, and we'll take your questions. But when we look at the stimulus package of about $4.4 trillion, biggest stimulus ever. Let's take a look at, there were 44 agencies essentially that this money was distributed to. And we can go to this Fred chart here. I just want to look at the spike in savings to show you all what we're talking about. Because if you look back in the history, and this dates back to 1960s, this chart, right? If we look back since 1960s, we've never seen savings accounts like what we see here in 2020. And it didn't take long for us to drop money, drop our accounts, and then there was more stimulus, that was programs that were created, and we got another spike in savings accounts. And of course, you can see where we are right now. We're all the way down, almost at an all-time low in savings. And that is still, about a month or so lagging in data. When this San Francisco Fed report came out, I mean, they say we're in the negative now. We're not even at the, at the zero line. That they're saying we're in the negative in our savings accounts. So the question becomes, when we're looking at the most stimulus ever printed, the most programs ever printed, students not paying their loans, people not paying their mortgage payments, over 1 million households were rescued from foreclosure. Where's the money? If you're not paying your mortgage payment, that's stimulus. You're living free.
Forbearance was stimulative. Absolutely.
If it's a workout, if they're putting the money on the back end. So our point, and we're not knocking you because you're in further debt today than what you were before they gave all the money out. I'm not criticizing you. All I'm saying is it didn't work. It worked for somebody, something, some people, some companies, some entities. Somebody got the money somewhere. But it didn't, when we look at the direct correlation between the debt-based consumer debt base that we have right now, and the money that was printed in the forbearance and the forgiveness programs that was forgiven and delayed and pushed down the road, Americans are in worse position today than they have been historically, which is terrible. Because here's the thing. I'm not saying the pandemic wasn't terrible to lock people down, and the situation that we had, people quickly started spending money. They quickly got themselves in debt and did all their home projects and did everything they could, right? We've forgotten how to go to the office. We don't go to the office anymore. There's a lot of spillover that is still saving people money. They're not driving like they did. They're not putting gas in their car. But the point is, we're in worse financial position today because as this money was printed, like you said, prices went through the rails. And they're still through the rails. This number's bullshit. What they're telling us with inflation is flat out wrong. Right? What they're telling us with this unemployment, if you're unemployed for over a year, they don't count it. So I think when we're getting down here, you know, I think what we need to look at is, let's look at the consumer loans chart. Let's bring that in. And Jack, one of the things that you and I talked about for our Saturday video is we talked about banking. You know, think about this for a minute. If we go, and by the way, we're looking at this chart, is consumer debt.
Credit card bill.
Credit card bills.
Yep.
Revolving debt, right? I mean, it's crazy. Look at that chart, guys. Look at the chart, all right? Look what happened in 2010-ish, going into 2011. Man, straight line up, right? We don't have that straight line here in debt.
I believe that big move in 2011 was a change to the way they track the data. I could be wrong about that. Okay. I think that big step change up there.
It might be.
Yeah.
Because nobody goes straight up.
Yeah.
It's like we woke up one day and we're in debt. But look at the trend line.
Yeah.
Look at the trend line. But the thing is here, I mean, all these asset prices have gone up. We know that people can't afford this. Now we finally drained everything, right? Let's look at some of these programs. Because when you understand that how this stimulus has benefited and helped to not even have a plain land, when Jay Powell said we're going to try and, it may be bumpy, but we're going to try and land this thing, you know, try and soft land.
Might encounter some chop, I think is the phrase.
Yeah.
From Wolf of Wall Street. There might be some chop.
Might be some chop,
Just
but
a little chop.
we're gonna land this. I think so far we've seen no landing at all, right?
Yeah.
But let's talk about it. So the number one. Now keep in mind, we're not going to cover all these things. We're not going to bore you guys with some of the details here, but we're just going to talk about it. But what I wanted to say, Jack, on our video that's coming out on Saturday. This may be one of the reasons why the banks are struggling. So at the same time that consumers had more money in their savings account, at that same time, right? We see that spike where consumers have money in their savings account. Put that chart back up of the banking savings accounts. At the same time that we had this money, what happened was the Federal Reserve eliminated the need for vault money, essentially.
They suspended the supplementary leverage ratio. Yeah. Basically, no money needs to be kept in reserve.
Which means?
Issue more loans, and banks don't need to keep any cash in the
When you put your money in the bank, they spend it all. They lend it out. Yeah. So now are we really surprised that banking, the collapse of the banking industry that we've seen so far, are we surprised at that?
It was 100% Federal Reserve engineered. And, that spike that we're looking at here on the chart that Joe had up just a second ago, that big spike in the savings, we flooded the system with cash. And nobody could go out. You weren't allowed to do anything. So a lot of people put that cash in the bank. And what do banks do? Banks pay you interest. So banks need to earn interest to pay you interest. So banks took their money and they were careful. They bought U.S. Treasuries, which is typically not a very risky investment. They bought bonds, of which there was ample bonds going around in the market because the government was borrowing so money, they created so many of the things. And the Fed was happy to monetize that debt. The Fed was buying them up like crazy. So the interest rates were effectively zero on those bonds. They were very, very low. So the banks decided to position themselves carefully and they bought US bonds. Now, fast forward, the Fed says, hey, it's safe, don't worry. We're not even thinking about raising interest rates, they told us in 2021. Not even thinking about. I remember those ridiculous FOMC press conferences. Are you thinking about yet? Finally, I think it was August of 2022, we finally got that out of the way, and Powell said, yes, we're finally thinking about it. Could we stop with this? But that was a lot sooner. The Fed said, we're not even planning on doing our first rate hike until the beginning of 2025, end of 2024. And well, the first rate hikes came a heck of a lot sooner than that. So the banks bought all these US Treasuries, and when you raise interest rates, bond values go down. Right? They're inversely correlated. So the assets that the banks bought with our money, of which the Fed gave us so much in the stimmies, the assets that the banks went and bought because the Fed told them it was safe to, started to go down in value with those interest rate hikes. And that is what caused this big pile of unrealized losses on the balance sheets of banks. All the bonds they bought with our money went down. They still owe us our money back. The assets they bought went down in value. So the Fed created the situation that caused the banks to pile into those treasuries, and then the Fed created the situation that caused those treasuries to go down in value. And of course, the Fed's answer was the Bank Term Funding Program, print more money and give it to the banks to make up for the money that they lost. And now here we are a year after the Bank Term Funding Program, and inflation is coming back, and we're all acting surprised. Sometimes I just wish the Fed would stop helping. Just don't do anything. Try doing nothing for a change.
Well, you know, when you're looking at the results of the consumer spending that's been going on and all the reporting that's coming out, it's easy to see, or easy to say, or easy to believe that the economy is fine.
Best economy ever. Yep.
That's, you know, we don't understand it. We've raised rates. We've raised mortgage rates. We don't understand it. Well, I can tell you guys one thing. There are more cash sales out there than I've seen in a decade. So when they're saying that, you know, houses are selling, the cash deals are, I mean, people are borrowing the money from their mom and dad to buy the house. We're seeing that. We're seeing where the parents are putting up 100% of the money, and they're doing notes. They're doing mortgages for their kids. You know, they're not giving it to them, but I'm seeing, you know, $1 million transactions where the parents are giving the money, right?
And that's probably playing a role in some of these data points we're seeing, like average sale prices are on the rise, median home prices are on the rise, because most of the transactions that are happening are cash deals of a wealthier clientele who are buying higher priced, bigger houses, because the lower class, the middle class, they've got the golden handcuffs. They're stuck in the house. They refied the mortgage in 2022. They got that nice 2.5%, 3% mortgage. They're sticking with it. But the cash buyers at the higher end of the income spectrum, they're still making deals. And so it looks like home prices are still rising in some markets, but it's really just the more expensive homes are the only ones that are trading right now.
And if the people don't have money, well, I'll take that back, because we are seeing more seller contributions than I've seen in 3 or 4 years.
It's no longer an instant seller's market. The seller's got to work a little bit for that.
Depending on the price point of the house. Yeah. You know, we're seeing where the at least in Maryland, we're seeing where the higher price homes, the people have the money, they're buying them cash. But when we get into, I'm going to say here in the mid 4s, we're seeing anything over 5, I would say, we're seeing still a very competitive market where the bidding is kind of, that's the more desirable product. The higher end product, the 600,000 product and over $1 million product, that product is very desired, and we're still seeing multiple offers. But it's an interesting, in that mid 4s, it seems like, because so many of these buyers can't afford to buy, right? So you go from, they have the money, they can pay cash, they can compete, they can put at least a big down payment, and they don't mind the higher interest rate because they want it, because they have the money. But soon as you get down to the price point of the middle to lower earners, it's like it's a different market completely. It's like the tale of two cities. These buyers, even though you may get multiple offers, they need cash back. So where we didn't see that, even in that price point, the lower price points, because the interest rates were so low, these buyers could still bid and compete because there was a lot of them that had money, but they're, or could afford the payment with the lower interest rate. Now they're knocked completely out. It's a complete tale of two cities with that. Well, let's look at some of the stimulus. And as we look at these examples, guys, I just want to remind you that this is according to a government website. And first, Melissa's put up a super chat here. I imagine J. Powell waiting up from nightly wage price spiral nightmares. Labor market softening is embroidered on his pillow, sleeps like a baby. Jose, that's a great comment.
I picture J. Powell in his Scrooge hat, the sleeping cap from the 1920s, hanging down the side of his head.
He's no dummy. I mean, J. Powell, he has a resume. I mean,
I knocked J. Powell quite a bit. I would not want that job. You could not pay me enough to take that job.
I wouldn't want any of their jobs.
It's a thankless job. And if you're J. Powell right now, put yourself in his position. No matter what you do, you're going to screw people. You could fight the inflation by raising interest rates knowing you're going to put people out of work, hurt people, or you could leave the inflation in place, let everybody keep working, but, well, now the poor keep getting poorer because of the increasing cost of living. He doesn't have, there's no option here where the middle class and the poor don't take the brunt of this.
You think they're going to raise rates?
Raise rates?
Yeah.
No, I don't think we're going to see a hike, and he's pretty much told us that. But I would point out that the Fed doesn't control the long end of the yield curve. The Fed only controls the Fed funds rate, that overnight rate. The interest rate on the 10-year Treasury, the Fed doesn't control that, at least not directly. They can buy and sell those bonds, but the interest rate on the 10-year Treasury, the bond market determines what that is, and inflation expectations has a big say in what people are willing to lend money to the government for 10 years for. And the Fed does not directly control that. They can manipulate it a little bit with the treasuries that they let mature and what they rebuy. So just because the Fed doesn't raise doesn't mean interest rates can't go higher from here, especially with Japan potentially dumping our debt to try to save the yen, something we talked about earlier today that you'll see on Saturday.
Well, mortgage rates are 8%, depending on what your credit is.
8%.
I mean, that's, we haven't seen that in a while. You're definitely in the high sevens with good credit on average now. I mean, there are some credit unions and different, lenders that you can get in the low sevens. But if you just look at, generally speaking, I mean, they're at 8%, unless you're buying down points. So you take that, you look at it, you go, okay, I personally believe that mortgage interest rates are going to go higher before it's all said and done. I think that we'll be over 8%, certainly by coming in the year end.
Can't help but wonder how many people are out there buying more house than they can afford right now, thinking those rates are going to go lower and they're just going to refinance out of it. And I get the feeling there's a lot of that going on, especially earlier this year. Back in January, everybody was saying there was going to be 7 rate cuts by the end of the year. And now we're sitting here saying maybe there's going to be 2. And we got CPI coming out tomorrow. We may be talking about none depending on what happens tomorrow, or maybe 3 will be back on the table. But 7, probably not happening, not without blood in the streets anyway.
How about the 3-2-1 buy down?
The 3-2-1 buy down.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
So and this is just one of the loan programs out there, but you talk about interest rates and how many people are praying to God that the interest rates come down because and here's what gets me with all of this. And what they say, these lenders, first of all, I hate this phrase. If you're a lender and you're listening to this, if you say this, this is a good way to get you kicked out of my office. right? And we've done it. Date the rate and marry the house. I hate that. That is the stupidest term ever. When I hear somebody say that, date the rate, that is like, first of all, I mean, that's like an idiotic.
Well, I can just always refinance. Not if
It's
you're underwater,
idiotic.
you can't.
It's idiotic. They're basically spreading false hope, right? Most of the people that say this haven't been in business for 10 years. Most of the people that you hear say this, they just picked it up. It's like this, I don't know, whatever. You all get my point. What they don't tell you is you may not be able to refinance. So even if rates come down, it doesn't matter. So forget about the fact that the people are praying that the rates come down. If they do come down, it doesn't mean that you can refinance, because that costs money. It's fees involved with that, lender fees involved with that. Now some of these lenders are saying, yeah, but we will refinance it at no fees. Come on, they're building them in somewhere. There's a fee, right? If you're giving that guarantee, you're going to pay for an appraisal. You better have equity in your house. And if you put very little money down, you're probably not going to have any equity in your house, because if the rates come down, the asset prices will have already corrected probably, right? At least during that period you're trying to refinance. And then you have to add up all the fees of refinancing, starting back your amortization schedule to day one, where you're paying mostly interest. So now you're refinancing, you're paying interest over again. And you need to do the calculations to determine whether that even makes sense, because most people don't stay in their house 7 years. So when you look at that and you go, okay, to refinance, it's going to cost me this much money. Is it worth doing? Probably the answer is no. You're just going to make your lender more wealthy. So that's that. But how many people, the 3-2-1 buy down, and this is a lot of new home builders are doing this. They're not essentially reducing your interest rate. Your interest rate is the rate that you're going to get in 3 years. You're going to end up with, right? But basically what happens, year one, you're 3 percentage points lower. Year two, you're 2% lower. Year three, you're 1% lower than what you bought at. If it's 7.5%, you're 4.5%, right? You're essentially it goes up.
Sounds a lot like an arm, a little bit.
It is, essentially. By year four, in a 3-2-1 buy down, you're paying your 7.5%, your original payment. So what they say, and this is really important, because here's the problem. They say that they are qualifying you today as if you can afford that 4 years from now, when the rate goes back to where it was before it was bought down. It's a rate buy down by the builder. Sometimes it costs $40,000, $50,000 to buy down these rates. So they're not reporting that as a reduction of a home sale, but that's a home price reduction. They're qualifying the borrowers now for that price in the future. But how do you guarantee someone's financial position is not going to change in 4 years? That's the risk. It's not the risk of whether you can refinance, because you may not be able to. Rates might not drop down to enough to make it make sense. The risk is, will you be making the same money in 4 years? And in this market, I would bank on not making the same or more money, because I think we are going to see a lot of unemployment.
And even just making the same money, even if that assumption is true, you still might not be safe, because what has car insurance done over the last 3 or 4 years? What's your health insurance done? What's the cost of food, your utility bills done?
Repairs.
Making the same money is not enough in this scenario. Repairs, wear and tear on the house, absolutely. So, you look at this 3-2-1 buy down, you look at what that payment's going to be in year one, you get dollar signs in your eyes, you don't look any further. They've lured you in with that low upfront payment, not realizing you just screwed yourself a few years from now.
Yep.
And in an environment where the cost of living keeps going up like this, that's dangerous. You're playing with fire.
I think we had another super chat.
I saw our buddy Travis was in there.
All right, let's see here. All right. Can you run another poll? I'm interested in how much cash savings money markets that the 10,000 plus have. Might be a pretty high number, maybe in increments of 10, 50, 50, 100, 100, 250, and 250 plus.
I think he's referring to what form is that cash savings in? Is it in a money market? Is it in a savings account? Am I interpreting that right?
Well, he says how much cash savings money markets that the 10K plus have, like go up higher than that. And I'm not going to ask you guys. I mean, we can't repoll at this point. But Joe, pull the poll up and let's see where we are with that. I mean, this is kind of an interesting poll because I believe that our audience, our listeners, have a tendency to be on the higher, more of a saver. Yep. Because they're listening so that they can save and learn, right? So let's expand that. All right. So interesting. Less than 1,000 guys, 20%. 1 in 5 of our audience voters here. 860 votes. Let's keep that going. If you all can vote, I'm really curious about this number. I appreciate you taking the time to do it. Somebody said we lied. I hope you didn't lie. 20%, less than 1,000. I mean, we want an honest read here. We're not collecting your data.
Yeah, we can't sell this data if you guys aren't responding truthfully. So.
Right. Not selling your data. 1 to 5,000, 14%, and 5 to 10,000, 10%. More than 10,000, 57%. So more than half of our audience here, voters, have more than $10,000 saved up. It's great to know. It really is. It's good to have a savings account. I always say to people they should have at least 6 months of money in the bank before they buy a house. And for all you first-time home buyers out there, you should take that to heart. You shouldn't be buying something that you don't have cash left over after buying moving boxes even. I'm talking about whatever it costs you to buy that house and move. You should have 6 months of reserves in a bank. Don't touch it. Somewhere available cash, whether it's in whatever, wherever you keep it, even if it's in the stock market, just something where you have reserves.
Hey, a 1 month T-bill, you're going to get 5.4% or 5.38 right now. That's not bad for no risk, and you have a look at your money once a month. So, if you're wondering what do you do with a little bit of cash on the side, right now, T-bill and chill is where I live. I got asset valuations at all-time highs across the board, bubbles everywhere you look. I'm sitting this out. I've missed a lot of upside, but my risk-adjusted return, I am totally comfortable with sitting in T-bills. I got a little bit of gold, a little bit of Bitcoin too. But it's not often you can get 5.4% for a 1 month lockup. That's pretty solid.
Bitcoin. I need to, it's amazing. We get a lot of spam in our channel. It's amazing in the comments section. We try and stay on top of it and delete it. And let me tell you guys, a little sidebar. One of the best things you can do when you notice a bot or spamming my channel in the comments, call it a bot, call it a spam. If we don't get a chance to catch them when they are running wild and they're whatever algorithm or repeaters or however they do it, all of a sudden makes it 427 likes in 15 minutes and 19 messages. If you just simply say in there, this is a bot, eventually I'm going to catch it and I'm going to delete the whole thread. You're not going to get deleted, but we hide those users and make them create another one, which probably takes them a millisecond to do, but at least we feel like we're doing something about it. But anyway, we're going to the Bitcoin conference. Jack, I don't know if you're going to be able to go with us or not. I've invited you. But we're going to, you talk about Bitcoin. This is something that I need to know a little bit more about because I need to find out whether this is, like Peter Schiff says in our podcast, that it's a scam or a joke or a Ponzi scheme. Other people are like, you don't know what you're talking about. You have people like Brock Pierce that, in fact, yeah, well,
Mighty Ducks, Brock Pierce from Tether, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So anyway, he's billionaire, right? I think.
Yeah, Brock Pierce from the Mighty Ducks. He starts his company called Tether. He teams up with a bank called Deltec that's run by, I think, the executive producer of the Inspector Gadget cartoon from the 1980s. Yeah. And next thing you know, you got $1 trillion, my opinion, $1 trillion, not quite above board company called Tether out there. That a lot of people are avoiding crypto because of Tether. It is a danger in the crypto market.
And you're saying this is Brock's company?
Brock was one of the founders of Tether. He's not involved in it anymore, but he got out of it. He was one of the founders.
Well, if you can figure a way to get Brock to podcast on our show, well, we've been trying. We've been trying. He lives in Puerto Rico. Maybe we'll find him at this Bitcoin conference. But we're going to the Bitcoin conference to interview, and it's in July. It should be pretty fun, pretty cool. The door's still open. You're welcome to come with us. Anyway, maybe a couple more comments here before we get into digging into this stimulus, because I want to talk about the PPP program.
Oh, I love that one, yeah.
You really knew a lot about Brock. You've been researching that guy.
I've done a little bit of homework. Yeah. I got a little bit to show for my time here, Todd. You know?
All right, all right. Okay. You got any videos on him?
No, I haven't done any videos on Brock, but I talk about Tether a lot.
Okay.
I think one day Tether pops, and it's going to be a bad day to be in any crypto. That could happen tomorrow. That could happen when Bitcoin is at 2 million. And I guarantee you the hate comments are going to pile up in the chat when I said 2 million for Bitcoin. But a few years ago, if I had told you 60,000 Bitcoin, you would have got the same result. So
You think Bitcoin's going to go to $2 million?
I do.
Come on, man.
I do. Yep. Bitcoin is the closest thing to an alternative to the US dollar for global trade that's out there. Nothing comes close. And I know a lot of people aren't going to like it. It is immutable.
You believe in it?
Do I believe in it? It makes it sound like religious. Bitcoin is code. It's a line of code. It doesn't have feelings. You could subscribe to the thing that it was a CIA op to distract people from buying gold, and therefore it's going to blow up. Sure, you can buy into that if you want. It's the 2020s. Let's not rule anything out. But the way Bitcoin works, the way the code is, it's permissionless. It is the easiest way to move wealth. It is the cheapest, most secure way to move wealth. If you're trying to interact globally outside of the US dollar, it's your best alternative. And the way the US is abusing the privilege of the world reserve currency and the way all the other governments of the world are making the same mistake, there is nothing anywhere near ready to step up and displace the dollar in global trade. Bitcoin is the closest thing to any of it.
So what do you think about the fact that on your tax returns now, the IRS has a little question in there that asks if you have any cryptocurrency? What do you think of that?
The IRS has a lot of questions.
I mean, you've got to answer it right.
Yeah, you do. Sure. So answer it right. I'm not talking about tax evasion. I'm just talking about transacting in it, right? It's not illegal to hold it. It's not illegal to transact in it. Follow the tax code. Follow the law.
You better not lose your wallet.
Yeah, you can lose your money. You can lose your gold.
Gone,
right?
gone.
I mean, we're talking about bank failures left and right here. And you're right. But, the fact that so much Bitcoin gets lost, that's actually one reason why I think Bitcoin is headed higher. Because when Bitcoin is lost forever, that Bitcoin is taken out of circulation. It's basically removed from Bitcoin supply. There's only ever going to be, I think 21 million is the number.
How do you know it's lost?
If you lose your private keys, it's gone forever.
But
you
they
can
don't
still
know that.
see it
You
there.
just may just not be accessing it.
But it's no longer moving. And there's a lot of Bitcoin that's just been sitting still for years. Some of that has been lost. Some of it is just people hodling, is the phrase. But once it's lost, once those private keys are gone, that Bitcoin's never coming back into circulation. So
Can
it's
you
removed
lose
from
it
the
if it just
liquidity.
sits there? It's like having money in a bank and all of a sudden one day you go to pull it out, but it's been sitting in there for 2 years or 3 years, and all of a sudden they want you to reclaim it.
Well, think
like,
of it
oh,
like,
you want to take this money out? Well, what are you going to do with it? Why do you want to take your own money out? I haven't. It's like suspended.
Think of it like Captain Flint's gold, right? His ship sank and it fell into the bottom of the Marianas Trench. The gold still exists. It's still gold supply that's been mined. It's out of circulation and it ain't coming back. Maybe tens of thousands of years from now, we'll be able to go back and recover it. The computing power will be able to.
Yeah, but you just said that the computer or whatever will absorb that money that's sitting there or the Bitcoin and put it back in circulation.
Oh no, not the Bitcoin itself. The Bitcoin is still sitting at that wallet address, in that wallet address, and anybody can look,
So you never
and
lose
there
it.
it is.
Right.
But you can't move it. You can't use it. It's no longer
I
circulating.
think you need to come to the Bitcoin conference.
They'll be saying the same thing at Bitcoin. You'll get bigger numbers than 2 million, but
All right.
sorry
Any
about
more
that
questions? I
aside.
think we have
Yeah.
another super chat here. We'll pull it up. Oh man, who's this guy? Real Estate Mindset.
Bonkers.
Oh, I've heard of him before.
Bonkers.
I've heard of him, Travis. What's up, brother? We appreciate you. Should I YOLO my life savings in the game stunk?
Game stunk.
Real question. I mean, whoa, what did that do today?
I looked this morning before I went live, and GameStop was up 130% or 113% just ahead of the market open. It ended up closing down a much more modest, I think like 60%. Look, when you've got stocks are going up in value, high double-digit percentages several days in a row, sometimes triple-digit percentages, getting halted 9 or 10 times a day for volatility, this is not an environment where the Fed is going to cut rates. If people are bidding up meme stocks 100%, call it a gamma squeeze, call it whatever's going on, you're not going to see rate cuts in that environment. It just shows you we've still got further to go. Now, I like to see the apes winning. I like to see the market makers losing. I like to see it going higher. It's probably going to end the way it ended last time. A couple of people are going to get very rich, and a lot of people are going to get very broke. But I wish them luck. I'm not chasing at these levels. It's a casino. There's science behind it, but
All right, let's dive into this a little bit. We're getting this information from government websites. 527 departments is where financial relief or aid, stimulus was dispersed. At the top of the spending of the CFDA program, which is the Catalog of Federal Domestic Assistance during the pandemic era, number one, the largest stimulus was the payroll or paycheck protection loan program. Did you know that?
I did. I didn't know that particular fact, the CFDA, but I did know most of the stimmies went to PPP.
And this site says that the total outlays for PPP was $811,560,669,275.
Amazing. You know, there's a
11 million, over 11 million total awards.
There's a picture going around on Twitter of a sports car, and the license plate says PPP loan. And I think that summarizes it pretty well.
No.
There's a lot
You ought
of
to be
fraud.
following that car. The Paycheck Protection Program established by the CARES Act is implemented by the Small Business Administration with support from the Department of Treasury. This program, it provided small businesses with funds to pay up to 8 weeks of payroll costs, including benefits. Now, these funds could also be used to pay interest on mortgages, rent, and utilities. Now, Jack, looking back, what is your opinion of the program, the PPP program?
I think it is just shocking that we had inflation following this. How could we possibly have known inflation was coming other than the fact that we ordered everybody to not work, so we reduced the supply of goods and services, and then we flooded the market with new currency, and the prices went up. It's amazing how that works. Who could have predicted this? And they told us it would be transitory. Amazing how much they use that word.
I think the amazing part here is that, obviously it contributed to helping keeping the economy going, right? I mean, you just said it. I mean, it allowed spending. Look, I think the whole thing was delivered as a disaster, right? I mean, there were all kinds of problems that I was hearing where, companies were, the banks that were distributing the loans were focusing on their top customers first. I know of people that were trying to get the money, but they were kind of pushed aside. Now, I mean, look, businesses were allowed to stay open. I'm not saying that this is a bad thing. I'm not criticizing the program. I'm just back to the fact that this is why the economy boomed.
And they'll be prosecuting fraud for decades
I don't
for
know.
PPP.
I don't know.
I guarantee
I don't know that they will.
I can tell you why. And I've seen this before with something similar. Hurricane Sandy hits New Jersey, where I lived. I was about 20 miles north of where the eye made landfall, Hurricane Sandy. And President Obama was campaigning. He had his famous photo op where he's hugging Chris Christie in his what must surely have been a disgustingly odorous fleece that he had been wearing for weeks at this point. And the federal government promises, we're going to get you the money you need to rebuild from this hurricane. They just throw tens of billions of dollars at the program, and anybody who votes against it is against storm aid. How could you possibly vote against storm aid? In your own state, too. Oh, my goodness. Everybody was so aghast that anyone would dare vote against shoveling tens of billions of dollars. And then everybody's like, oh, crap, it's New Jersey. That's right. It's like the fraud capital of the world. Illinois is out there like, hey, no, we are. No, sorry. It's top 3 states for fraud in the country. This day, here we are, 12 years after Sandy. And every single week in my hometown newspaper, they're still prosecuting another guy who took Sandy relief money for a second home, fraudulently claiming that his multi-million-dollar beach house was his primary residence and he took Sandy money, or a contractor who didn't have a license who took Sandy money to do repairs on jobs that he never did. And the courts are still to this day backed up with Sandy fraud 12 years later.
I mean, if you go on the Department of Justice website, there's very little information on what's happening as far as prosecuting. I know that they did say the FBI was going to be prosecuting or investigating the fraud and things like that. But I mean, here's the deal. And I've also read where it's very difficult to prosecute, because how do you go back in time and tell these people, as long as they put it in a separate bank account? I mean, that was the safest thing to do. I never got it. I never got any of it. Didn't even apply for it, even though I could have. I'm not saying that because I pat myself on the back. I just didn't. We were working. We were still working. Why would I do that? We were in an industry, though. I know people in this industry that got PPP money in a time when we were making more money and more profits historically in the housing market. And we were allowed to work. So what the hell would you need that money for? If you're making more money selling houses, we never slowed down. In fact, it just took off. The market took off. So when you get that money, it's essentially, look, I'm not an expert in it, but essentially you're just, look.
Now, I've told you the Cross River story before on this channel, but we can't talk about PPP
right,
without talking about
do it.
Cross River
Go
Bank.
ahead.
We have to. All right. The 4 busiest banks with PPP loans. You're going to recognize the first 3. JP Morgan, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and in 4th place, Cross River Bank from Fort Lee, New Jersey. A bank nobody's ever heard of. This tiny little, it's not even publicly traded. And if you follow Cross River Bank, there's some people out there, the hair's probably sticking up on their neck, because these guys are involved in every sleazy corner of finance, pushing the limits of what's legal everywhere in finance. And these guys, despite having 200 employees, I forget the number, but they issued hundreds of thousands of PPP loans. And what would happen is the government knew that we can't process all these loan applications fast enough, but we have these businesses that already know how to review loans called banks. So we'll make the banks give the loans, and then we'll buy the loans from the banks. We'll take that IOU on the taxpayer's dime. And so Cross River says, okay, we're going to start issuing loans, selling them to the government, collecting a fee along the way. And of course, the risk is immediately sold to the government. Cross River doesn't take any risk for the loans. And they realize, wow, we're making a lot of money here. If we had more money to lend out, we could collect even more fees. So Cross River Bank goes out and they take out a massive loan from the other big banks so they have more capital to issue more loans. They partner with fintech in Silicon Valley, so you can apply for a PPP loan through your PayPal app or your Klarna app or your Affirm, whatever. Partner with all of these fintech apps where, okay, I've got my one-person side hustle business. Sure, I've got 15 employees that I want to approve, and then Cross River runs their rigorous background check on this company and says, yeah, you're approved for a PPP loan. They collect their fee, they dump that loan on the government's books, and they did it hundreds of thousands of times in a span of a few months with just 200 employees. Do you think they were really looking at what they were loaning? Or do you think they just took money from anybody who was willing to pay the fee and made those loans to anybody, and the government was just shoveling money into the system, so they enabled this? And it got so bad that the FDIC issued a cease and desist, or it might have been the controller of the currency. It was one of the government financial regulators, ordered them to stop doing what they were doing because they knew it was obviously a fraud. And are you telling me within these hundreds of thousands of loans being approved and underwritten by a bank with 200 employees, and that includes the IT guys in the HR department and the people who pick up the trash and everything, 200 total employees, you probably had maybe 24 people actually doing risk review? Do you really think there was not a massive fraud going on there? It's going to take years to prosecute this.
Are they doing it? Are they investigating it?
They ordered them to stop. Have the prosecution started yet? No. But every day you hear stories about companies that it's questionable whether they really had employees, or the president's wife or the senator's wife had a side hustle. She sold her crafts at a craft fair and somehow took a $50,000 PPP loan to keep her staff working, even though she didn't have any employees. You're going to find this all over the place.
Yeah, that's crazy, man. There was one of my favorite restaurants. This is just a story that sticks out in my mind. Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, right? Or Ruth's Chris Restaurant. They gave their PPP money back. I remember when it happened, they're a franchise, but they really fell into a lot of scrutiny. In fact, there's news articles out there everywhere, but they took $20 million in PPP.
Wow. And
there you go. Facing for Ruth's Chris high-end steak chain returns $20 million small business loan. And the Ruth's Hospitality Group, which owns the Ruth's Chris house brand, operates more than 100 steakhouses across the United States, Canada, and Mexico. But it managed to get these two loans totaling to $20 million. And, it goes on, the article goes on to say that after they accepted the money, they were under fire. And because these stimulus loans were really for struggling small businesses. And we know, a lot of very wealthy multi-million-dollar establishments took the money.
And who ultimately paid for it? The people who are now struggling with the increased cost of living. That's what financed it. So remember, when you're paying your higher car insurance premium, when you're paying more for your food, more for everything in your life, where did that money go? PPP is one of the places where that money went. You weren't being given anything with those stimulus plans.
Well, then they came out, and you can see here on hometreasury.gov, it says Paycheck Protection Program, PPP, borrowers may be eligible for loan forgiveness if the funds were used for eligible payroll costs, payments on business mortgage, interest payments, rent, or utilities during either the 8 or 24-week period after the disbursements. You had mentioned, Jack, potential mishandling that from what you've spoken about on your channel. Should they have given the money to the businesses?
No. They shouldn't have shut them down to begin with. I don't know how deep in these weeds you want to go. It's YouTube. I don't want to get you in trouble here.
Right, you better. But look, we've already had the other side of that. But
we've got the benefit of hindsight now.
Right.
It was obviously not the right decision. It wasn't the 2 weeks they told us. It's questionable what effect it had, but we can easily quantify the economic effects. And look, when you make a loan, money is created, and the money supply expands. And then when that loan is paid back, or when that loan defaults, money is then destroyed, and the credit, it's net neutral. When you make the loan and then you forgive it, and the government takes that on to the government's debt, that was so inflationary, so stimulative. And again, you're wondering why life is getting more expensive. They're sitting here trying to blame gas station owners, trying to blame greedy companies for raising prices, as if greed was invented in 2022. Right? Science made the major breakthrough. Greed was discovered in a lab somewhere, or somebody engineered greed in 2022. It didn't exist beforehand. No, that didn't happen? Well, then why are we blaming greedy companies for inflation? They've always been greedy. They would have raised prices if they could have years ago. They increased the money supply. That allowed them to raise the prices. Now we're living with it.
I think that's greed.
Yeah, it is greed.
That's
but
fueled greed.
Greed is kept in check by the free market. And the critics of capitalism love to say capitalism equals greed. Oh, really? The socialists aren't greedy? Really? Who's the wealthiest woman in Venezuela? I think it's Hugo Chavez's granddaughter. She's not greedy? Give me a break. They're not all sharing, trust me. Greed is a human condition. It's not a capitalist or a communist condition. It's a human condition. Capitalism does a better job, not a perfect job, but a better job of keeping greed in check than anything. But we're constantly straying away from capitalism by allowing the government to pick the winners and losers. That's not capitalist. That and increasing the money supply to make sure that the losers never actually lose, which penalizes the winners via inflation. So yeah, greed, no, it wasn't invented in 2022. We cleared the way for greed to prosper with the money printing. That's what we did.
So just to be clear, and I don't, look, I think human nature is, you know, in all the years of customer service, I've always taught and was taught the fact that two things. One is, if you want to get what you want, you help as many people as you can get what they want, right? I mean, that's common sense in business.
Give value, get value.
But really, more important than that is treat other people as if they're the most important person in the world, because in their eyes, they are. Now it's not, I mean, that could be misread too. I mean, you look at it, if you have a spouse, you have kids, you might look at them as more important than you, right? But for the most part, what you just said, with there's probably a little bit of human nature that is greedy and you want it for yourself, right? I mean, there isn't, I mean, look, all you have to do is go to dinner at a big family's house and watch how fast the hands go in and grab the pizza, right? I mean, I'm getting mine, because if I don't, there's not going to be anything left, right? So I agree with what you're saying.
You're talking about convincing somebody to be your client, convincing them to be your customer by providing a better service.
No, what I'm saying is just that the people is, we have an innate desire to look out for ourselves.
Sure.
Right. I mean, that's a fair assessment with your assessment with greed.
We're living beings. All animals are the same way.
Or is what you're saying here, when you print this money, you're saying that it was printed so that these elite companies or individuals can get more of it, can take it.
Absolutely.
Right. I mean, that's what happens when you see the prices in the industries go across the board up, right? We see cars, and when you look at the MSRP, what does that stand for? Manufacturer's suggested retail price. And then all of a sudden you say, oh yeah, well now we're not selling it at that. We're selling for $20,000 more, $25,000 more. We did a couple things. We controlled the supply, right? And then stimulated the consumers with money and allowed these other industries. I mean, is that what you're saying?
We did that. We also did things like put a lot of small businesses, just ban them from doing business. And, you know, those businesses were struggling to stay alive. A lot of small businesses went out of business during
But they gave
the
us
pandemic.
PPP money.
Yeah, that helped. But it, you know, I remember the story of the gym in New Jersey that just wanted to open so people could work out, and they ended up arresting the owner. They were fining him thousands of dollars a day for opening a gym. But bigger companies have this thing called the bond market that they can go to, and they can borrow money while their smaller competition is being put out of business by being forced to have half the tables in their restaurant empty because of some arbitrary distance that some unelected official decided was safe. Again, so I apologize if I'm getting in trouble here. But big businesses can survive that because they can go to the bond market. And interest rates were down near zero, so buying in the bond market or selling into the bond market, taking on new debt was very cheap for these big companies. A mom and pop shop can't access the bond market for capital to keep their business alive. They go out of business. The big business is losing money, but he borrows from the bond market. You even had the Federal Reserve created a special purpose vehicle that allowed the Fed to actually go buy up junk bond debt to make sure the borrowing cost for these unprofitable companies was cheap. So in a fair level playing field, mom and pop would have been struggling to stay in business in the same situation. The big business actually would have gone out of business first because big businesses are less efficient than smaller operations. But because of the additional burdens that were placed on them and then special borrowing privileges that are granted to the big companies, they prospered and captured market shares while small businesses were put out. Again, it's not capitalism, it's bureaucracy. It's
well, how about
manipulation.
this for the small businesses? So we talked about how consumers are in the biggest debt, in more debt than they've ever been historically, right? We know that. And they've received the biggest stimulus package historically. Didn't work. Well, what about the businesses that took the PPP money? Not the ones that shouldn't have taken it, that you're saying that the DOJ or whoever's going to go after, FBI, whatever, is going to go after these companies for years and years and years to come.
You give a kid candy, a kid's going to eat it.
But what I'm saying is, do you think that this PPP money has set these smaller businesses back?
No, the PPP money, I don't think it set the smaller businesses back. I don't think it helped them as much as we think it did. And considering the resulting inflation from it, I think it's hurt most people in the long run. And I would also challenge the statement about the stimulus and that it didn't work. It worked really well for a short time. Remember the log jam at US ports in 2021? Remember the parking lot outside of LA, all the ships that couldn't get in, we couldn't unload them fast enough? You gave everybody money and they spent it. Again, you give a kid candy, he's going to eat it. Not to make the metaphor of people or children, but a lot of people financially have the mentality of a child with no self-control, so they went out and they spent that stuff. And they ordered a ton of it. And most of our stuff is imported, so what were we doing? We were financing factories building consumer crap in China with that stimulus money.
I knew people that were small businesses, they still are, struggling today, that received PPP money. They actually bought inventory with the money that now they can't sell because they were out of, so a business, and it's interesting because a lot of people don't realize this if they never had a business, but most of these businesses that serve us, they prepay or buy in advance. If they don't have it, they can't sell it. So when a business couldn't get goods or materials, they couldn't make money. So when they could get the materials, they overbought because they were afraid that they weren't going to be able to make money because they wouldn't have the product. So they took that PPP money, they hired more staff, they bought more inventory, and now they still have the inventory. They can't get rid of it. It's going to take them out. A lot of them, supply companies primarily. They bought a lot of junk.
We've seen that really hurt the logistics industry. They went from couldn't move all the cargo that was being ordered. Oh, we have a truck driver shortage, a backup at the ports. They all ordered more ships. They all bought new trucks. And then we had that bank, what was the bank last year that failed? Citizens Bank of Sac City, Iowa, failed because of loans to the trucking industry. Because a lot of people took out loans to buy new trucks, started a new trucking business during the boom time, and then, of course, everybody spent their savings, and now the truck is empty and it's sitting. They can't make the payments on it. It actually failed a small bank in rural Iowa. You also had a lot of shipping companies really took it on the chin. They ordered new boats. Oh, we need the new giant container ships. And now they're being built. They're all entering service. Oh, crap. Now there's big slowdown in global trade. Now there's nothing to put in.
They're stacking them
up. And the price to move a cargo container or a can across the ocean has just dropped out of the
Maybe
sky.
they'll sell them as tiny homes.
Or run them up on the beach in India and scrap them just as soon as they enter circulation.
Be tiny homes. Yeah. We have a super chat. Let's take that. Rod, love the frank talk and the unvarnished truth. If 78% of Americans are literally living paycheck to paycheck, how does this not all end in disaster when the debt is also out of control? Thanks. Thanks, Rod. We appreciate your super chat and your comment. What do you think? You think 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck?
I'm not familiar with that exact figure, but I've seen a lot of numbers very similar to that. And, you know, it's real easy to get lost. I think a lot of people probably looked at that survey that you put up and said, 10,000, who doesn't have 10,000, right? Most of your audience probably does. And then you got to realize, 78% of people don't have anything. They'd be in the zero column there. So, you know, if you're one of the people who has 10,000 in a savings account, understand you are better off than pretty much everybody else in the world. You may not feel rich, but you're in a pretty good situation. Now, what was the rest of the comment? What was that he said?
He's just saying, how does this not all end in disaster?
I wonder that myself. I wonder how it hasn't already ended in disaster. We've seen that credit card chart that we had up before. That is at an all-time high, $1.053 trillion in credit card debt. So a lot of it is going on the plastic right now, which means the inevitable pain is still accumulating. We're still in the making things worse scenario. And on top of that chart of the credit card debt, you've also got buy now, pay later, which is this new form of consumer credit that's brand new, and they're calling it ghost debt or phantom debt because it doesn't get reported to credit agencies. It's unsecured, uncollateralized debt. Most of the people borrowing it have 660 credit scores or below, so you'd call that subprime. Cross River Bank from Fort Lee, New Jersey is teaming up with the fintechs to securitize those loans. There's that bank again.
How are they securitizing the buy now, pay later?
The loans themselves are point of sale financing, which buy now, pay later, I think, is the 4 payments or less. And then there's point of sale financing, which is offered on the same apps. It's maybe not pay in 4, but pay in 6 months or 12 months, 0% interest, or, you know, low interest rate. They're taking those loans, those IOUs, they're made to people with 660 credit scores on average, so half of them are lower than that. They're putting them into bonds, and they're saying it's okay. Most of the people are paying us back, which we have no way to scrutinize that talking point because the data is not reported to the credit bureaus.
So they're arbitraging it essentially.
They're securitizing it. They're putting it into a bond and selling it to investors. And the stuff.
Yeah, but they know a percentage of them are going to be bad. If you pull them together, I mean, is that what
they're claiming? They're some of the things that are coming out in like a firm's earnings reports.
They can't think it's getting paid back.
I don't think it. I think a lot of it is not getting paid back, and they're using very qualitative statements, not quantitative. They're saying, oh, the default rate is very low and most people are paying us back. Well, what's the number? Give me some math here so I can decide what's low and what's most. They don't report the data. It's not required to be reported to the credit bureaus. So for all we know, half these people aren't paying it back, or 49% aren't paying it back. So technically, when we say most are paying it back, it's accurate. But we do know that the average buy now, pay later borrower has a 660 credit score, which is terrible, or lower. So these people, the delinquencies are rising on the auto rates, the delinquencies are rising on mortgages, on credit cards, but the buy now, pay later debt, they're paying that back. And we just have to take their word for it because, again, they're not required to report it. I think in hindsight, inevitably that is going to blow up. We have no idea how big it is, how much of it there is. But there's a lot of economists, there's a lot of people out there scratching their heads wondering, how is consumer spending still so high when this is a new variable in this equation that we have no way of quantifying? Maybe that's the missing ingredient that we're not paying attention to.
Yeah.
And there's that dang bank, Cross River, they're all over this. They're the ones that are underwriting these loans and helping them to securitize it.
And people are buying groceries with this.
15 million people. There was an article a few weeks ago. 15 million households are putting groceries on buy now, pay later.
That's sad.
As you assume that's a household of 4, you're talking 60 million people are eating on BNPL.
Yeah, that's predatory.
It's the best economy ever. Soft landing.
Yeah, in my opinion, that's terrible. I mean, it's so sad that consumers, I've known for a very long time that they're financing life's essentials. And, gas to put in their car to get back and forth to work. They're putting on credit cards. I mean, think about this. They're paying 3 and 4 times the amount for something by paying for it in finance and on a credit card. I mean, at 30% interest rates, and sometimes higher than that, 35% interest rates. That's
and
a
I'd say
crime.
watch those late fees too. On that buy now, pay later, a lot of them have very, very intense late fees. The interest rate might look attractive, or they might even lure you in with 0% interest. But what happens if you miss that payment? It's not pretty.
Let's talk about the biggest, or not the biggest, but the combined stimulus package, because PPP was a lot of money, that where a lot of people don't realize, how you mentioned one of the, and there was something specifically for education as part of this, COVID relief stimulus. But let's talk about the Provider Relief Fund and the American Rescue Plan, the ARP, and that was 161. There's some conflicting data. This is the lower number from what I've seen. I think I saw as high as $161 trillion. I mean, 167 trillion. But let's just take this 161 trillion, 100 million, 988,000.
161 billion, I think we're talking about. 161 trillion, that's a really big number.
No, billion. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
okay.
Yeah, billion. Sorry. It's late, man.
I mean, it's the 2020s. Let's not rule it out here, but
2020.
just
No, billion. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
That's right. I need to drink some more Red Bull. I'll give Red Bull a free ad.
don't give them any ideas here, Todd.
Yeah.
Somewhere there's a
161
congressman writing that
billion.
down.
Right. But that was just the one portion of it. Then there was the coronavirus relief fund, which is $149 billion, $861 million, right? So there's a fact sheet that you can see on whitehouse.gov, and it says, give working families, and this is where we talk about the stimulus. It gives working families initially a $1,400 per person check, bringing their total relief payment from this and the December down payment program that they had to $2,000. But more than 85% of households will receive a check, and checks in this bill are bigger than the checks in the CARES Act. So this is now the CARES Act. The CARES Act authorized direct payments of $1,200 per adult plus $500 per child or individuals making up to $75,000 a year, heads of households making up to $112,500 a year, and couples filing jointly up to $150,000. And for the first time, adult dependents are entitled to a check as well. This means a lower or middle income family of four will see an additional $5,600 in their pockets. That was a pretty big plan. I mean, if you're seeing an average family getting $5,600 a year, I mean, that's a pretty big stimulus program.
It is.
At a time when people weren't spending money. That's why we saw that big savings plan, savings account.
And the banks had to do something with it, so they put it into U.S. Treasuries.
Yep.
While interest rates were low.
Yeah, so now let's talk about the unemployment side of it. So there was, part of that rescue plan was healthcare coverage stimulus, food programs, child tax credits, rent and mortgage assistance, and loan remodifications, so people didn't get evicted or foreclosed. Yet it increased unemployment benefits of a federal stipend on top of the state-provided unemployment of an additional $300 a week.
Every program you list right now, in my head, I'm hearing the cash register ring with every single one, and my blood pressure is going up a little bit higher every time. Just so you know the effect this is having on me. I'm getting triggered. Todd is triggering me. This is how an Austrian gets triggered. But were these people actually given anything? Now, I mean, any of you guys out there watching that, now you got your check, it's probably gone. Or if you're like me, you bought gold with it. But do you feel like you were given anything? Now that here we are, the money's gone, you're living with the higher prices that resulted from it? You're hearing it's the best economy ever, even though you don't eat out anymore, you haven't had a vacation in years. Do you really feel like you were given anything? And I think it was Karl Marx. There's a pretty famous quote. It was Marx or one of those other commie socialist wackos made a comment about capitalism. He said, don't worry about capitalism. I'm paraphrasing here. He said, sooner or later, they're going to figure out they can vote themselves each other's money, and that'll be that. And isn't that what we're doing here?
Yeah, well, like I said, I mean, the fact of the matter is we've given out all this money, but let's talk about now, how can somebody say that they didn't have stimulus?
They did. Everybody had stimulus one way or another. I mean, unless you were homeless on the street then and you're homeless on the street now, you didn't get any stimulus. If you're in student debt, you got stimulus. If you're making less than a few $1 million a year and you've got kids, you got stimulus. If you own a business, you got stimulus. If your mortgage went into forbearance, you got stimulus. If you didn't pay your rent, but you didn't get evicted because of the moratorium, you got stimulus. There's a lot of different ways people got stimulus. If you
have a job, you're a recipient of stimulus.
You got stimulus.
Because let's face it, the economy wouldn't have boomed the way that it did also, without it.
Did you refinance your house from a 5% mortgage down to a 3% mortgage, freeing up $600 a month for you to go spend? You got stimulus. You can thank the Federal Reserve for that. They bid down the interest rates.
So now what happens? Because it's gone.
Now it's gone. Now, we talked about this in the video we did today. It's coming out Saturday. The bifurcation is starting to show up now. We have two parallel economies. And I tell you, one of the things, I am increasingly disgusted with the traditional financial press because I keep hearing about bad vibes. This is literally, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal not too long ago, a guy named Greg Ip wrote an article, said that the economy is great, you're the problem. And I was like, you might as well just make your headline gaslight. You're the problem, talking to you, the middle class. Why don't you understand how good you have it? Just look at how unemployment is so low. Just look at how the stock market is doing. Just look at how inflation is down to 3%. Yeah, it's the best economy ever. What's the matter with you poor people? You don't understand how good you have it? You guys, what's wrong with you guys? Well, he lives on one side of that bifurcated economy, the side where everybody's sitting on all-time high asset prices, making money hand over fist, right? He's in stocks, all-time highs. He's in real estate, all-time highs. The average family doesn't have assets like that. They're not seeing the benefit of the inflation. They're only seeing the cost of the inflation. Their wages haven't gone up enough to keep up with the inflation, so their quality of living has gone down. And you're telling these people that they're the problem? Careful. History has shown us when societies reach that kind of point, that kind of a spread between how most people are living and how the ruling class is living, good things don't usually follow that. And I think we're going to stop short of discussing garden tools here, like I think you mentioned one of your other guests did. But I think they need to be a little more careful about the kind of language they're using. And this term, vibe session, bad vibes, if people just realize how good they have it, all our problems would go away. Go out and touch some grass, people, seriously. Get out of New York, get out of Wall Street. Go look, instead of just flying over these states, land and go see what life is like in these towns. Good God. And stop putting out titles like that. You're the problem.
Let's take some questions. All right, here we go. Another super chat here. PPP loans were designed to get small businesses in debt, increasing their failure debt.
If that was really the goal, why forgive the loan? I would challenge. It makes that one kind of hard to believe. If they're going to forgive the loans, then the company's not really in debt. All you did was give them the money.
Well, I mean, I can see that, like with my point of some of the folks that I know that incurred a lot more debt because of it. I mean, here's the problem. The problem is that when we're manipulating markets or stimulating the economy, it gives people a lot of false hope. And we're assuming that even I mean, look, for the most part, the reason why we are talked into things and out of things is because of what we hear in the news or in headline news, mainstream media. That's all that people really take the time to understand. So in commercial real estate, I'll use this analogy. You have a business owner that is leasing a space, right? That space may be 100% wrong for them. But they sign a lease with hopes that they'll find something else. And then what do? They start running their business. They're dealing with day-to-day problems. They forget their lease is coming up for renewal. The lease says that you have to let them know 90 days ahead of time, or it's going to automatically renew for another term in a lot of cases, which could be another 3 years. What people don't understand is the burden a small business person has in operating a small business, to make a profit, to not go out of business, to provide for employees, to provide for their clientele, a service that people will return, right? It's not easy. So when you're giving loans to businesses, it's almost like they're just taking that money in false hope that things are just going to be great or continue, that they're not going to go through this downturn because they had this 8 or 12 week stipend to get them through the bad time. What they didn't realize was that's not the bad time. The bad time's coming when we wake up from this. And as a result, what did they do? They bought inventory so that they wouldn't be without. They bought new vehicles. They brought more people in to handle the rush of business that was coming in, right? So now as a result that things are waking up and that the money supply is coming out of the market because they don't have the money. People don't have the money. We know big ticket items are coming down. If they're servicing, if you have a heating and air company, you're not doing the installs. You're fixing putting a Band-Aid on things. If you're a roofer, you're not necessarily getting the big roofing jobs. You're getting a repair job now because people don't have the money for it. Look at all the new cars that are sitting on the lots now, right? So what we're doing by this is my opinion, it being in business 35 years, when a business owner is working in their business, they're focusing on what's happening right now. They're not forecasting. People say, well, what's your 5-year plan? Give me a freaking break. 5-year plan, I'd like to get through the next 12 months. I'm focusing on this season. I'm focusing on summer. I'm focusing on the winter, holiday season. I don't know my 5-year plan. We're talking about small businesses here, right? The largest employer in America. So when we look at this comment, and this probably is a business owner, they want you to sacrifice the value of your dollar to keep the manipulated economy going.
You mentioned it gives people false hope, the manipulation. It also gives people false signals when the government messes with the free market. And price is information. A free market generates price based on supply and demand. So the price of an object is information the free market provides on the scarcity and the utility, the usefulness of that product. When the government comes in and dumps money supply or picks winners and losers, or take the example of the ships and the trucks in 2021, the government came in and dumped all this money into the economy. They sent a false signal that there was more demand for consumer goods than there really was. And the trucking companies and the shipping companies took that false signal and said, well, the price to move goods is going up. I'm going to invest in a new truck. I'm going to invest in a new ship. Well, it turned out that was a false signal. So now those new trucks and those new ships are here, and there's nothing to go on them. The truckers went out of business. They took Citizens Bank of Sac City, Iowa down. The shipping companies have no use for the trucks. The price to move things across the ocean is now plummeting. They're all losing money. So it gives false information, and you get inefficient allocation of capital in the economy, you get wasteful investment, wasteful spending, and you get more pain down the line. And I will say, by extension, that comment about how PPP put businesses in debt. Ultimately, all government debt is on the backs of the taxpayer or the dollar holder. One would, depending on how you look at it. How are we going to pay off the debt? With future taxes or with future inflation, one way or another. So all this debt, all this free stuff, we're just going to pay for it in the back end, either through inflation or higher taxes, one way or another. So again, we weren't given anything. And by extension, that comment is true, that those companies were driven further in debt and that ultimately they're the ones paying for it. Small businesses pay a lot of taxes.
And to your point, though, I don't think that necessarily that was the intent of the program. I don't think that was the intent of the program. I mean, I don't know how these decision makers make their decisions. I can tell you that, through the years, I've been invited to, a lot of these people are campaigning for office. And, I've gone to I don't like going to them, I've gone to very few events. But the question that I always ask is, have you ever ran a business? Have you ever signed a paycheck? Do you even know what it's all about? Do you know the sacrifices that people make? They want to say, oh, we need to champion small business. Do you even know what they are? Do you even know who they are? Right? And, so I do see where I get that. And by the way, a little plug for our channel here. I talk about home buyers a lot. If you're a business out there, a small business, and you're in a lease, you might have a lot of options and your lease comes up for renewal. If you're in a lease right now, and getting back to my point there, because, I have done commercial real estate in helping, tenants find locations to lease and landlords find tenants to occupy the space. But if you're in a lease and your lease is coming up and you want to talk about it, send me an email, because you probably have a lot of options, and people don't even realize, if you're a struggling business out there, they don't even realize that their location, their space has a lot to do with how successful they are. Whether they're wasting money or whether they, are on the wrong side of the street or in the wrong area for their client base. So, I think that, I don't want to let our commercial people listening that are running businesses go by the wayside here. And if you are out there trying to buy or sell a house, if you're in Maryland, obviously, we're your company. We hope that you would reach out to us and that we would be your choice, your first choice, that you at least give us an opportunity to interview to help you buy or sell a house. And if you're anywhere else in the country, we do have an amazing broker network. Just simply send us in an email and of what you're looking for, if you're looking to buy, sell, rent, and we'd like to help you with that. So I just want, and all of this chatter that we talk about at the end of the day, I mean, Jack was listening to me prior to coming on our live stream on the phone with clients making calls. I mean, we really do work real estate here, and we'd love to help you. So I just want to put that out there.
You're a juggler. You got a lot of balls up in the air at any given point in time, Todd. My hat's off to you.
I never looked at myself as a juggler.
Yeah, you juggle.
I juggle. All right, let's take another question. And we appreciate your questions and your comments. Keep them coming. What about the accuracy of the data that has been coming out lately? Have you find anything kind of weird here? Did you look at the bank's quarterly reports on debt repayment trends, Jack?
What was the data point asked if I had looked at the bank?
That's been coming out. Accuracy of the data that has been coming out.
Unfortunately, the government data is the hand that we're dealt. And it has been very flawed. In particular, I've been railing a lot against the jobs numbers. We've seen a lot of suspicious downward revisions after the fact to a lot of the labor numbers. A lot of things in the household survey within the jobs reports that we get every month don't make sense. For example, according to the latest jobs numbers, the headline was that we added, I think, 175,000 jobs was the number, it's ballpark what it was. But then within the household survey, supposedly we gained almost 1 million full-time jobs in the month of March. That just can't be true. So there's the discrepancies and the margins of errors look like they're getting bigger and bigger as time goes. That's a signature of somebody's got their thumb on the scale. Somebody's messing with things. But the data, it's the data we have. There's no other alternative. So the best you can do is scrutinize the data and look for those inaccuracies and try to make a judgment call based on what you're seeing. I can tell you my analysis of the jobs reports, the labor market has been a whole hell of a lot weaker than they've been telling us for a long time. And we're just now starting
What about
to
the
realize
government
it.
jobs?
You know, most of the government jobs, according to the reports, have been local government jobs, state and local, teachers, police, firefighters. I believe they're hiring. Although we're going to see that reverse soon. I'm starting to see a lot of headlines about teachers getting laid off, about school enrollments coming down because, whoops, we forgot to make babies. Locked everybody inside. Everybody became antisocial. They're glued to these things all day. As long as it's my channel, that's okay, by the way. But hey, oh, that's right. We forgot to interact and socialize, and now we're not having kids anymore. We're offsetting that with immigration, but you have less kids going to school in America now, and we need less teachers. Enrollment's down. So the state and local jobs may not be there very long. This bifurcation in the economy, poor people can't afford to eat out.
Explain
go
the
on vacation.
bifurcation. You know, I don't think you did that.
So, you know, bifurcation, you see a tree. You ever see two of those trees right next to each other? One tree grows into two. That's a bifurcated tree. For whatever reason, the tree just went two separate ways. We have two separate economies right now. We've got the top randomly selected, say 10%, is doing really well. They're taking more vacations. They're buying more luxury goods. Their net worth is higher. A lot of the post-pandemic savings that looked like we still had a lot of savings left, most people, it was all already gone. The people in the luxury side still had a lot of it. And so it looked like the average person still had money in the bank. Most of it was on the wealthy side of things. These are the people saying everything is great. These are the people who are gaslighting you in the Wall Street Journal. What's the problem with you guys in the other trunk of the tree and your bad vibes? Can't you see how good we have it? You're cash buyers buying $1 million homes, right? That's one side that has split because of the inflation, because inflation really benefits the ownership class and it really punishes the wage earner and the consumer. And that's the other side of the bifurcation. The person who has not seen the benefits because he doesn't own assets, his wages haven't gone up enough, but his cost of living has skyrocketed. So he's not shopping as much. He's not traveling as much. You're seeing it. I wrote down a couple of notes. You can see it. Dine Brands Global reported earnings last week. That's the owner of Applebee's and IHOP. Same restaurant sales down 4.6%. That's not adjusted for inflation, so you got to take another 3.5% off to adjust for inflation. So you're talking about 7, almost 8% fewer sales at that restaurant. Spirit Airlines furloughing 260 pilots, canceling all their Airbus deliveries for 2025. That's a budget airline. People aren't traveling. It's got nothing to do with Boeing. These are Airbus planes that they ordered. Airbus is supposed to be doing really well with Boeing having all their problems, but Spirit is canceling their new plane buys. Apple iPhone sales down 10%. Poor people can't afford $1,000 phones. Yum Brands, they own KFC, Taco Bell, Pizza Hut. Their same restaurant sales down 3%. Southwest saw revenue per available seat mile decline 3.5%. You're seeing all of these budget areas of the economy. The lower end hotels aren't doing so well, while the luxury brands do great. And there's a guy I follow on X, his name's Frog Capital, at Frog News is his name, and he went into Hilton's earnings, Hilton, the hotel chain. And you know, Hilton owns all these different hotel brands. The luxury side of things, the occupancy rate, like at the Waldorf Astoria, was up 3.2%. Conrad Hotels and Resorts up 4.8%. LXR up 5.1%. The luxury brands Hilton owns, they're seeing more traffic at those hotels because the wealthy are doing really well. But in the same earnings report, the Hampton Inn is seeing occupancy down 1.6%. Well, the rich people don't stay at the Hampton Inn. That's your middle class. That's your poor folks. Homewood Suites down 1%. Hilton Garden Inn down 0.3%. The luxury hotels are doing great. The budget hotels are doing lousy. The budget airlines are doing lousy. The budget restaurants are doing lousy. We've got two different economies here. The wealthy are in one, everybody else is in the other. Now, sooner or later, the wealthy who owns all the stocks, wealthy people own stock in Spirit Airlines, wealthy people own stock in Yum Brands. If poor people can't afford to eat at those restaurants, sooner or later, those trunks are going to merge again, and the whole thing is going to head lower. And we're starting to see now that the credit cards are starting to get maxed out, the savings is gone. We're starting to see material declines in the business that's going on. Now, it's being masked in the overall stock market because we've got this AI bubble going at the same time. I won't get too much into that, but that's masking a lot of what's going on in the economy. It doesn't matter what this amazing new technology does. If nobody can afford to use it and buy it, it's not going anywhere.
Construction is slowing down. You know, one of the things, and I know, I think tomorrow we're podcasting with Travis, right?
Yep.
Talking about the housing market and inventory and how it's different from region to region, right?
Your real estate business is seeing a totally different market than what Travis is seeing in the Sun Belt.
Yeah, we have no inventory, right? Not like a lot of the country. Here in Maryland, we have a tight market. And I mean, it's government, flat out. We have big government jobs. Government jobs are fantastic right now. If you work for the government, you probably have a great job, right? And a secure job. So when you're talking about where we are locally, but that doesn't mean that these government workers aren't feeling the pain themselves of inflation. But it may not be causing them to stop buying. It's not stopping them from buying a house necessarily, right? At this point, if it's a home for sale. But we don't have the inventory. But what we are seeing is on the construction side of things, people aren't doing anything. They're buying the house, and then they're living with what they have. And I'll give you a proof. In one aspect, I needed an insulation company to do a job for a project, insulate a project and new construction. And I made a call for somebody to a company that I dealt with for years. And the guy's name is Adam. I sent him a text message and I said, Adam, this is a crazy request, but can I get a building insulated tomorrow? This is like at 3:30, by the way, at the end of the day. He texted me back and said, what's the address? And sure, we can do it. So I'm thinking this is an anomaly. He's doing it for me because I've given him a ton of business in the past. We have a great relationship. I haven't talked to him in 3 years. Wow. The next day, I stopped by the job, and this was just 2 weeks ago. And I'm talking to the insulators, and I said, I'm just kind of curious, how's business? And they said, terrible. We don't have any work. And they said about 2 weeks ago, so this is now probably 4 weeks, business dried up. This is in every aspect of construction of everyone I speak with. No work out there. Now, there's a lot of small jobs, but as far as new construction, new projects, people building additions, people doing major spending, they're not doing it. Even locally, despite the fact that we have still a strong housing market. They're not spending money on anything else. They're buying their assets. Maybe they're protecting their cash. Maybe that's happening since we're seeing a lot of cash transactions. They're saying, well, look, if we lose 70%, of our cash sitting in the bank, the value drops. I may as well buy a fixed asset, right? To protect my money. But that doesn't mean that they're going to continue to spend and put money in somebody else's pocket. When new construction dries up, and it's about to, all these new construction starts of these big multifamily and commercial projects that we saw break ground over the last year or two, because it takes several years to do some of these big projects. And they're finalizing these projects. We're going to see a lot of construction workers out of work. That's just going to be the beginning, in my opinion. That's just the tip of the iceberg. We're not recovering from this anytime soon. We have to experience a downturn, a recession of some type, I believe. 35 years in business. This is not going to continue the way that it is. So I think that what we're seeing is people are, like I said, they're protecting their assets, their cash. They're investing in real estate still because they know or hoping that despite any kind of correction, it's going to continue to go up because we're going to have to see some kind of hyperinflation. So we may see market specific major price corrections. We may not see it everywhere.
You know, gold is showing us that too, because we're seeing gold is just a hair shy of its all-time high right now, even though since the start of the year, interest rates have moved higher in a pretty meaningful way. And the dollar has strengthened since the beginning of the year. And typically higher interest rates and a stronger dollar is very bad for gold. It sends gold lower. And yet we're watching gold rally to all-time highs here. Gold is telling us there's another wave of inflation is coming. Gold does really well before the inflation, not so much during, but it does really well before the inflation. And, you know, gold is doing incredibly well right now. And, you know, also to your point, you were mentioning about the insulator, may not be an apples to apples comparison, but Home Depot's latest earnings, I think that was actually this morning or yesterday it came out, comparable store sales down 2.8%. Again, not adjusted for inflation, so that number is really closer to 6% down if you factor in inflation. And Home Depot markets pretty heavily to contractors. It's where pros get it done, right? That's their phrase. So yeah, you can see that slowdown in Home Depot's earnings that you just described, where the work is starting to slow up here. So I don't know how much longer we're going to be able to see it. We have seen a little bit of, you mentioned government jobs. Government spending is driving a lot of construction jobs. We're building a lot of chip factories, a lot of electric vehicle factories, even though the EV bubble is popping as we speak. That's government spending that's creating construction jobs that would not otherwise be there. So,
but not everybody can take advantage of that.
Well, no, that doesn't help.
So it's not, you know, when you look at the bulk of businesses, you know, these government contractors that are working, you know, not everybody can you can't just jump into that arena.
Well, it's not government contractors. It's Intel is having the plant built, but they're using a several billion-dollar grant from the federal government.
They're government contractors. They're contractors that the government has hired. I don't mean internal contractors, but when they're building these buildings, they're utilizing companies that have been approved or can bid or that are, you know, have the ability to do that kind of work for the government. And let me tell you, I have through the years, I've done government jobs. Getting paid is not very fast. There aren't a lot of people that can bankroll a government job, right? A government construction project. Not everybody can bankroll that. So, you know, that's not, and I know what you're saying, and that's part of the stimulus package.
It's another way we're being stimulated.
That's part of the stimulus package, okay? A lot of this stimulus is going to infrastructure and, you know, building things and, you know, yeah, of course, they're making money for those jobs, for those projects. That's increasing government employment. It's also increasing the amount of government contractors that get the job. But we find that a few of the contractors get all the work, right? We see that, at least locally, my experience with that. You know, if you're doing government work, a few of the contractors, a few of the GCs are getting the work. And so it's not, you know, a lot of that's not benefiting the average, construction company. Let's take some more questions.
We mentioned
Go ahead.
false signals. Another thing the government has really heavily subsidized has been electric vehicles. I was looking at my notes. I have it written down somewhere in here. But we spent all this money on what was the money? The Green New Deal was buried within the Inflation Reduction Act, the laughably named Inflation Reduction Act. We spent all this money to subsidize electric vehicles and electric vehicle construction and battery plants and all these things. All these electric vehicle companies are flopping right now. Hertz, with government subsidies and tax credits, bought hundreds of thousands of electric vehicles. In their latest earnings report, They took a massive several $100 million hit because these things have depreciated. Nobody wants to rent an electric vehicle because they don't know where they can get it charged. They're liquidating tens of thousands of these EVs. It's another case where the government sent false information, false price signals through manipulating the market, caused an inefficient allocation of capital from Hertz and from companies to build these plants. It was sugar high economics, and now we're on the downslope. We're coming down from it, and it's creating real big problems.
I know prices of EVs have come down big time.
Yep, substantially.
Yeah. All right, okay, one more. 5 days ago, and thank you, Rod, for your super chat. 5 days ago, Forbes stated that 1 in 37 U.S. mortgages is seriously underwater. Mortgage is 25% higher than property value by that definition. How does that play out? 25% is a lot. You know, one of the issues that I've always had a problem with anything that you're financing is it's all about the payments. Can you afford the payment? Doesn't really matter what the asset price is. We learned that when we watched the mortgage rates for new, for sales, not refinance. So you have two different types of mortgage rates. You have a mortgage rate that if you're buying, and it doesn't have to be a new house, but a home, that's a new home purchase, even though it's not, I'm not talking about new construction. That usually is much lower than if you're refinancing. You can't get that 2.74 that we saw with new home purchases, not new home, but home purchases. You couldn't get that in your refinance. Maybe you were in the threes, high threes, maybe you were at 4, but you're not at 2.74% like we saw at the low. That allowed the asset price to really rise because as we're buying payments, how much can we afford? What percentage of the mortgage in this case, what percentage of my pay goes to that mortgage? That's all I really care about. Meanwhile, that allowed the asset price to really skyrocket. And then through inflation, people didn't even think about the fact that now their repair costs have gone up. So they bought more house than they should have. In a lot of cases, they may have even overspent just because they're buying that payment. Well, what we always say in the housing market is depending on how long you'll be there will really determine, as long as you can continue to make the payment, whether you are hurt by any type of price correction. If you're going to be there for 10 or 12 or 15 years, you really don't have to worry about it so much as long as you can afford to make the payment. But where we really have found that a lot of our first-time buyers, they made critical mistakes because the inventory, as they were coming on the market, the houses were selling super fast, competitive. They were getting this overexuberance and bidding on houses and losing houses, and that was really making them go crazy to buy houses that they wouldn't have necessarily ever purchased had it been a normal market. So they were making all these reckless decisions in spending, and probably 10 million of them maybe did this over a 4-year period. Now that remorse is setting in because they didn't realize that they can't sell it in 2 years once they realized that they didn't like the neighborhood that they moved into or the commute to the job that they're called back to or the fact that they waived their inspection rights and now their repair costs, they can't afford it, sending them over the edge. Or now that their taxes have gone up and their property insurance has doubled in some cases. These are really making consumers stressed out. So when we're talking about, these mortgages that are seriously underwater, their debt to income ratio doesn't work anymore. That in itself is making them underwater. If they don't have to sell, it's like stocks. You don't lose your money in the stock market when the stocks fall unless you sell it. Unless you have to sell, if you can hold on to them until the price goes back up again. And real estate always does seem to go back up in the history, through history. It goes up and down, ebbs and flows. We've seen some market corrections. But a lot of these buyers probably are underwater. And would I say that that 1 in 37? I'd say it's probably more than that.
It's about 2.7%. It's not an alarming number, 1 in 37. So, that doesn't ring alarm bells necessarily when I hear that. 25% underwater, that's ringing alarm bells. How do you get that bad?
Well, here's when we're looking at, when they're saying U.S. mortgages, they're not just comparing those mortgages in the last 4 years. They're saying outstanding mortgages.
All mortgages.
All
right.
mortgages. So when you're looking, if you looked at the percentage of mortgages that were underwater in the last 4 years, that number might be 30%.
And I tell you, if you think about where home values are now in most markets, how does a house get 25% underwater? It's got to be forbearance. It's got to be another way that forbearance, because you're taking years of payments, principal, interest, everything, and just tacking it onto your principal on the back end.
You need about 10% equity on average to sell a house. So if you're looking at, and when a lot of people are putting money down, let's just say that you're putting 3% down or 3.5% down. Now there's stats out there that say that people put an average of 20% down. I'm not buying that. But let's just say that they put 5% down. Now, a lot of people, which is a lot of money, by the way, 5% down is a lot of money, because you have to realize they have to pay all their closing costs up front. Your loan officer isn't getting paid over the next 30 years. You're prepaying that, right? Your real estate commission, which is at, headline news, right? They're saying real estate agents are why house prices are as high as they are. You're paying for your loan officer up front. You're paying for your title work up front. You're paying for your title insurance up front. There's a lot of costs that go into a house when you're buying a house. You might need 9% and only be putting down 3 or 4% on your actual home. If you have to sell that house in 2 or 3 years, if you're not seeing price appreciation, you're technically underwater.
You're writing a big check at closing if
You're
you
underwater.
sell that soon. Yep.
So it's not hard to say that mortgages are underwater, right? It's the degree of underwater.
25% though, that's a big number underwater. And I don't know there are some local markets that have seen price declines, but that's a big drop in price.
Again, you're 10% on average to sell a house. So if you put very little money down, let's say you put 3% down, let's say you're 7% underwater at that point. And if you saw any type of price shift, depending on where you bought. Now, here's the other thing. Let's just talk about what I said with the remorse that's setting in. The value is in the land, not the depreciating box that sits on top of it. People argue about this all the time. Houses fall apart. They'll fall down around you. You have to continually spend money to keep the house current and keep it updated, or you can't sell it for a profit. If you pick the wrong location and the market shifts or changes, you can't sell it for the price that you bought it for. I'm talking about in the perfect scenario, you need a 10% equity stake to come clean on your purchase if you're going to sell it, right? You've got to have 10% profit or equity in order to come out clean from the money that you put down or your mortgage or whatever. Now we throw into the fact that you didn't get the house home inspection. So now you're underwater because your repair costs are making that house a lot less valuable than it was the day you bought it a year ago or 2 years ago, right? Now let's look at the location. You bought a lot that nobody else would have bought had it been, had any other choice. And they say there's a buyer for every house, and that's true, but not at the price that the seller wants. Right? So when it's a less desirable lot, a less desirable area for the bulk of the buyers, your buyer pool is much smaller. That's going to reduce your value. So what I would say to anybody, if you're buying real estate, especially in a tight market, at least buy a property that's desirable because it will hold its value. You buy a property that everybody wants, that everybody would fall in love with. The land's beautiful. The topography is great. The location's centrally located to an area where people want to live and be there. It's the outliers where people are really losing money. So, I could see where, it wouldn't be hard to be 25% underwater in some circumstances. Do I think 1 in 37 or 25%? That may be more accurate.
Well, I'd say a lot of those are going to end up with zombie homeowners eventually in foreclosure. If you're 25% underwater at these prices, it's going to be a long time, if ever, that you break even on that. And at some point, that homeowner is going to realize what they're sitting on and stop making payments. We've seen it before.
Very well, maybe, and at that point, we might see more stimulus. We might see more. What the White House doesn't want is foreclosures. That we know. We know for certain, right?
We have all these people with no housing. The last thing we would want is people who can't afford homes to sell them and then have the fair market lower the price of those homes so that the people who can't afford them might actually have a chance at buying them. We can't allow that, right? We pay lip service to wanting affordable housing, and then we have these policies, monetary and fiscal, that do nothing but endlessly pump and support higher prices, and we pretend to care about affordable housing for poor people. You can't have both. You can't have homes perpetually going up in value and then not have people living in tents on the sidewalk who can't afford a place to live. These things are related. Politicians act like they're not. Oh, if the other guy didn't do this to taxes, it wouldn't happen. And if the other guy didn't do this with welfare, it wouldn't happen. It's the endless funneling of money, enabling higher prices. We see it in healthcare. We see it in college. We're seeing it in housing. The more the government tries to make something affordable, the more unobtainable, unaffordable it gets. Sorry, that was a little rant, but
all right,
a little ranty.
No problem. At least it's real estate related.
I wish the government would stop helping. I really do. We're all good here. No more help, thanks. No. Help off.
All right, I think we have at least one more super chat. Let's see what we got. Make sure we get everybody covered tonight. Chambersburg, PA has a huge influx of immigration. Ooh, why? When are we going to see home price corrections in Pennsylvania?
Well, if you're looking for home price corrections and you have a big influx of immigration is a lot of housing demand, isn't it? So if you're looking for lower prices and you're increasing demand, you're moving in the wrong direction. Also, if you're looking for wages to move higher so you can afford those prices, an influx of labor supply is not going to help your wages go up. So if it's affordability of housing, immigration is not helping, not in the least. Not on the wage front and not on the home price front.
All right. Stephen, we appreciate it. We have another one here. Costco sells a pretty darn good, I don't know how to say that, A-N-E-J-O, Año? Añejo? I don't know what.
I've been called that a few times. A lot of people call me an a-hole all the time, but
yeah. Just a public service announcement. I'm a giver. I don't know.
I feel wholly unqualified to comment on this.
Yeah, I don't know about that, man.
But thank you for the super chat.
Yeah, thanks for the super chat. Appreciate it. All right, Mike, how bad is the next few years going to be?
How many years left in this decade? We're not quite halfway through it yet. You just had to ask, didn't you?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a tough. I think it's going to be a tough go. I think we're going to have very slow growth, and I think we will see that recession. I think that the big, look, people need to start reining in their spending. I mean, you can't, I don't care who the president will be, whether it's the current administration, whether it's somebody else. But I think we have to realize that living with the assumption that stimulus is going to save you or save the day, that is a very, risky proposition. I think that we really need to keep our spending in check. We're going to have to do things like cook at home. I mean, that's, I think that goes without saying. I think that, going out and spending $75 for a meal for two is just something that we have to stop doing.
Somebody's saying if everybody types Red Lobster, maybe they will address. Is there some kind of Red Lobster question floating around in the chat? Red Lobster, Red Lobster. Red Lobster just announced a lot of store closures, a lot of restaurant closures today. They're laying off a lot of people. Like I was saying, the bifurcation of the economy. I don't know, what's the origin of the Red Lobster discussion in the live chat there? Oh, bankruptcy. Did they actually file? Red Lobster, yeah. And what was it, Yum Brands? I think they own Red Lobster. That's one of the ones we went over. It's another restaurant people can't afford to eat at. And, the lower priced restaurants are not doing well.
Look, little sidebar here. If somebody's paying $75 for a meal for two and the service sucks, they ain't coming back. Service sucks.
I've never been to a
I'm
Red
not
Lobster
talking about Red
my
Lobster.
whole
I'm just
life.
saying in general, right? It's when you have good customer service, it's almost like, refreshing, right? You're like, wow, this is great. Oh man, you brought me another drink before my tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth, right? I mean, come on.
So with the Red Lobster bankruptcy, I don't know, did they file Chapter 11 or what is it, 13, where they cease operations? Depending on what happens, but I want to point out real quick in the jobs market, the misconception is a lot of people say that it's all government jobs that have been created. Not necessarily true. One of the most consistent things I've seen in analyzing the jobs reports has been that it's part-time jobs that have been created in the last year. All these millions of jobs that the politicians are patting themselves on the back for creating so many jobs, they're BS, part-time, low-wage jobs, a lot of gig work, and a lot of multiple job holders, people getting second jobs to make ends meet. And when I see stories like the Red Lobster bankruptcy, and I see things like comparable sales are down at Applebee's and Spirit canceling their plane orders because people aren't traveling, that tells me these part-time jobs that have been fueling job growth, fueling this false narrative of a strong labor market, they're not going to be there much longer. A Red Lobster going bankrupt means there's a lot of low-wage servers, waiters, bus people, maybe a cashier, dishwashers, cooks, going out of work. Those part-time, low-wage jobs that have artificially inflated the jobs numbers for months and months aren't going to be there much longer. We've been shedding full-time jobs all this time, so I think we're looking at reality starting to set in the labor market very soon. And we also mentioned the influx of immigration recently. If you've got a lot of part-time jobs going away at the same time, you're seeing a big influx in low-wage labor, boy, that is not good for the average wage earner.
One of the reasons why part-time jobs is such a big thing, right? If you hire part-time employees, you don't have to pay them benefits.
It's cheaper.
It's cheaper. I bet you we'll see more part-time jobs. Now, the fact of the matter is, the reason why these part-time jobs are posting right now is because people need 2 and 3 jobs to pay their bills, right? That's kind of sad in itself. We go from an era when, my grandparents, not that far long ago, where one income was enough to raise a family of 6, right?
Yep.
Come on, man, right? I mean,
Not
to
anymore.
now we need both parents out in the workforce, and now that's not even enough. And now these 2 and 3 extra jobs that people need to have is just to pay the bills. right? But I think
Yeah, it's
personally,
not prosperity, it's desperation.
it's desperation, but
Absolutely.
I think these businesses are waking up to it because there are so many part-time jobs. They're saying, you know what, this isn't a bad deal. I can hire 3 people on a part-time job to cover an 8-hour shift, or 2 people to cover an 8-hour shift, and I don't have to pay them benefits. I don't have to give them paid time off. I don't have to give them vacation. I don't have to give them maternity, paternity leave.
Medical, dental,
I don't
sure.
have to give them health coverage, right? I think these businesses are going to start, they're going to say, hey, this is the best thing ever. That's so where we're headed to in the next cycle, I think in the next employment cycle is not going to be good. It's not going to be good. You're not paying the bills full time on a part-time wage. It's not going to happen. All right, I know we got another super chat here. Then we're going to get ready and close it off here. Automotive professionals, thank you again. Here we go. We got a couple more super chats. Why open the Treasury buyback if the economy is doing so well?
The Treasury buyback. You want me, I'll try to go through this one fast. The Treasury buyback is about manipulating long-term interest rates. All right, what Janet Yellen is doing with the Treasury buyback, it's only the second time we've ever done this. We did it in the 90s under Clinton because there was a budget surplus. We used some of that budget surplus to buy back U.S. Treasuries, pay back the debt. So we're not paying back the debt right now when we do a Treasury buyback because the government's still operating at a huge deficit. We're borrowing money in order to pay off debt that we have. What we're doing is we're borrowing money for 6 weeks, 6-week Treasury bills, and we're paying off 10-year Treasury bonds, 30-year Treasury bonds. Now, that's all about manipulating lower those long-term interest rates, which is your mortgages, your auto loans, your business loans. But we're doing it, we're financing that paying off the long-term government debt with short-term government debt. And right now we have an inverted yield curve, which means the short-term interest rates are more expensive than the long-term interest rates. So it's the stupidest refi ever. We're refining into a higher interest rate, and we're doing it because it's an election year, and we want to manipulate long-term interest rates lower to stimulate the economy. So the government is running a bigger deficit to mess with the yield curve, to actually make the inversion in the yield curve worse, because they're issuing new supply of bonds at the short end, sending those interest rates higher, those prices lower, and they're buying down the long end, sending those lower. And that's one of the reasons why Janet Yellen got a little upset when the Japanese started intervening in their currency market last week, because one of the ways the Japanese could intervene and stop the decline of their currency is by selling our government debt to get dollars and then dumping those dollars on the open market to prop up the yen. Well, that undoes everything she's trying to do with the Treasury buyback to manipulate interest rates. But once again, it's about stimulating the economy. The Fed won't do it, so she's going to do it herself. And it's sending false price signals, and it is 100% politics. It's bad economics. It is stupid, and it's going to cost us money in the long run.
There's nobody special finance guy here.
Not a big fan of the Janet.
Yeah, you have to definitely check out his channel. Jack is amazing. He does a lot of research on this stuff, and he brings the data, which is awesome. Yeah, there's his channel right there. If you haven't subscribed to his channel, cruise on over and subscribe to him. Enjoy his live stream every single day, Monday through Friday. I don't know how he does it, but he does. And it's good stuff. So I think we have one more super chat maybe here. Do we? Any other? There we go. All right, Charles. What's going on, Charles? Trucking companies are going under left and right too. Trucking rates have yet to go up. And I think, Charles, to your point, I think one of the things that this stimulus package has done is it made, with people, the spending that they were doing, look at the spending, man. Look how many people Amazon needed. Now Amazon, man, they've been laying off, closing places, distribution centers, right? I'm remembering that.
They're still building them in a lot of places too. They're building one pretty close to my house.
But they have shut some down, right?
Yep. I can tell you when it comes to logistics, there's a website called FreightWaves that is excellent at documenting not just truck freight, but oceanic freight, air freight, everything. And they've done a really good job of documenting the freight recession, they've been calling it. It rhymes with Great Recession. And their coverage is suggesting that we're not quite through with the freight recession yet, but we're almost there. That yes, the truckers have started going bankrupt. There's been a ton of bankruptcies in trucking.
And these trucks are hundreds of thousands of dollars for a truck.
And remember, it took down a bank already. It was a small bank in Iowa, but it took down a bank. We had Yellow went bankrupt. That was 30,000 jobs were lost when Yellow Trucking went bankrupt last year. It's not over yet, but according to Freight Waves, and they spend more time in this space than I do, so I'll take their word for it. We're almost there with the freight recession, not quite yet. So there's been a lot of chatter about the right sizing of inventory with a lot of the retailers like Target. They've been reducing their inventory for about a year now. Excuse me. And they're saying we're almost there. That pretty soon they're going to start reordering more of the stuff that they sell instead of reducing inventory down because they overbought inventory during the logjam at ports. So we're close to the end, but not quite yet.
They bought things that people are no longer wanting.
Or can't afford, yeah. And they panicked, they overbought inventory because they didn't know when they'd be able to get any. That inventory all arrived right around the time everybody ran out of money. Whoops.
Which is exactly what I was saying with
False
the small
signal.
businesses that are feeling the effects of the same exact thing. And they can't raise money like publicly traded companies can, right? With stocks and things like that, taking capital,
Can't access the bond market.
They can't access the bond market. They can't, right? So they're just taking the hit and going out of business. And unfortunately, probably a lot of these trucking companies are owner-operators, and they're, it's a sad state of affairs. All right, any more super chats here before we call it a night? We appreciate you guys. I think maybe that's it. All right, guys. Well, we thank you, Jack.
Thank you for having me. This is
Thank
great.
you so
I love
much,
coming
man.
down here. It's a quick drive. I love your studio.
Well, yeah, we're loving it too.
Thanks to my man. Thanks to Joe in the background. I don't know if Joe likes getting a thank you, but he does a great job back there.
Yeah, Joe is he's the man behind the scenes, so helps us to make it happen. Guys, we love you. We thank you for spending your Tuesday nights with us. If you haven't subscribed to Sachs Realty's channel, please consider doing so now. One of the biggest compliments that you can do for all of us here at Sachs Realty is to share our content. Share our videos, share our channel with your family and friends. Let's build this community to be bigger and stronger. And I think that we're really educating people through the guests that we bring on. And, we love spending time with you. But guys, let's one more time. Can we pull that poll up? I'm just kind of curious before we end here, guys. Let's see where we are. Here we go. Okay, it stayed pretty close to the same. So we had over 2,000 votes. Here we go. Less than 1,000, 21%, pretty consistent. 1 to 5,000, 13%. 5 to 10,000, 10%. And more than $10,000 in the bank, 57%. God bless you guys. We appreciate you. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.